What if the biggest war movie epic of the 1960s hid more secrets than it showed battles? That's exactly the case with Battle of the Bulge, 1965, a film that promised vast tank assaults and heroic Allied triumphs. But behind the cameras, production chaos, historical shortcuts, and Hollywood ambition erupted into surprising revelations. Did you know the film's terrain wasn't Ardennes snow? The commanders never existed, and some cast felt they were making a dream rather than documenting history. Today we count down 15 shocking, fascinating, and little-known facts from the making and legacy of Battle of the Bulge. Buckle up, you'll never watch that 170-minute war saga the same way again. This wasn't just a war film. It was a prestige production wrapped in Ultra Panavision. The makers of Battle of the Bulge opted to shoot in Ultra Panavision 70, a massive widescreen format that delivered a 2.76:1 aspect ratio, monumental for 1965. They wanted the grandeur of war, but ended up with scenes where you see more sky and arid terrain than snow-blanketed Ardennes forest. The ambition was clear: capture epic scale. Yet that very ambition opened the door to compromises in authenticity and raised eyebrows among historians. When you choose style as much as substance, every snapshot becomes a statement. In this case, that statement sometimes tilted away from fact and toward spectacle. What audiences didn't know at the time? That the vast vistas and wide-angle panoramas were less about the actual battlefield and more about cinema architecture, something that would shape how the film was received in the decades to come. It might have felt real in the moment, but behind the lens, the geography was telling a different story. What fans never realized was just how fictional the narrative actually is. Despite its title and promise, the film is a heavily fictionalized account of the real 1944 Ardennes offensive. The filmmakers themselves admitted in the end, credits they reorganized the chronological order of events to boost drama. Real senior Allied leadership is mostly absent from the screen. Instead, we get fictionalized Lieutenant Colonel Kiley, played by Henry Fonda, facing off against German Kolledazen Hessler by Robert Shaw. The decision to sideline real generals, real strategies, and even key historical turning points ranked as dramatic license. But that license meant the film stepped away from history into myth-making. As a result, what you see is more war movie fantasy than documentary truth. That gap between expectation and reality creates its own intrigue. How does a film that markets itself on a famous battle give us invented characters and rearranged events? The answer reveals something about 1960s Hollywood priorities. It was filmed in Spain, not Belgium, and the landscape tells the lie. In one of the most striking behind-the-scenes secrets, the movie was shot in the Sierra de Guadarrama, mountain range Spain, and around Madrid. The landscapes offered rugged terrain, yes, but not the dense woods, deep snow, and grim cold of the Ardennes in December 1944. In fact, the weather and vegetation often looked more Mediterranean or dry than wintry. Critics and historians pointed this out, noting the film's obvious mismatch between setting and reality. Why? Cost, access, and the demands of a massive production played their part. Shooting in Spain gave the filmmakers wide-open spaces, favorable contracts, and fewer restrictions. But that decision also meant every wide shot becomes a clue. Look at the terrain, the light, the foliage. It doesn't always match what the actual soldiers endured. For those who dig deeper, every cliffside and tank column filmed reveals the artifice behind the epic battlefield. A U.S. general actually complained. The film provoked real-life reaction. Remarkably, the movie stirred enough controversy that some veterans and officials questioned its accuracy. According to reviews, the film's blend of fact and fiction drew criticism for its liberties. One reviewer noted, "Any historical war film that inspires Ike Eisenhower to come out of retirement just so he can call bullshit on it clearly has problems." That line may be hyperbole, but it underscores that the film's historical dress was not immune from pushback. What this shows is that epic filmmaking doesn't exist in a vacuum. When you choose a famous real battle as your centerpiece, you invite scrutiny. The fact that this film did drew awkward heat, not only from critics, but from those who knew the war. So yes, for all the star power and big tanks, Battle of the Bulge had to answer to reality. And sometimes it failed. Big-name stars. But one nearly walked away. The cast reads like a war film dream team. Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, Robert Ryan, Dana Andrews, Charles Bronson, Telly Savalas. Behind the scenes, though, the director Ken Anakin admitted the dialogue and character relationships were nothing special. It seemed just another war picture. At least one star reportedly considered leaving the project because of concerns over the script's depth and the crowded ensemble. When you have dozens of major actors, each wanting meaningful screen time, something has to give. The result, while the film packaged itself as grand and serious, some of its lead talent felt they were making a spectacle rather than an intimate story. That tension between ambition and execution gives us our next key insight. Big war films can struggle to balance star power and story integrity. The tank battle was loud, but the tanks weren't quite right. War film watchers will recognize the roar of steel, the rumble of tracks, the explosion of fuel drums, all present in the film. Yet historically, the film took liberties with which tanks were used and how they were portrayed. One cited example: the German tanks crossing the Our River in the film do so under conditions that simply weren't accurate for December 1944. Moreover, some equipment used on set was post-war or mismatched to the actual units deployed in the Ardennes. That discrepancy didn't stop viewers at the time, but for modern viewers sensitized to authenticity, it's a clue. When a war film shows tanks breaking through snow-covered forests, you assume accuracy. But in this case, you may be seeing lighter terrain, vehicles in the wrong units, or fuel drums positioned for visual effect rather than historical fidelity. The war movie magic works, but at the cost of truth. Dialogue and character arcs took precedence over strict historical command structures. In the film, we get the portrayal of General Gray, Robert Ryan responding to Kylie's intelligence. In reality, Allied command during the Ardennes was far more layered and complex. The film, by contrast, simplifies. One man spots the Germans, one general doubts him. One battle happens. Reviewers have pointed out that the film's opening narration gets details wrong. To the north stood Montgomery's Eighth Army, even though Montgomery's command was different at the time. This kind of error reveals a deeper choice. The filmmakers wanted drama, not classroom fidelity. Thus we see the central tension of this war epic. Does someone want realism or a story we can follow? Here, the story wins. That means some events are compressed, merged, or invented. Characters stand in for many, and command decisions vanish. For the viewer, who loves accuracy, that raises eyebrows. And for those simply in for cinematic impact, it may not matter. Either way, it's a secret of the film. The premiere date held special significance: December 16, 1965. The world premiere of the film occurred on December 16, 1965, at the Pacific Cinerama Dome in Hollywood, exactly 21 years to the day after the real battle began in 1944. That timing was no coincidence. The studio wanted resonance, gravity, and publicity. Imagine sitting in that premiere, aware that 21 years earlier, soldiers were freezing in the Ardennes. It created a mood, an association of memory and film. But the irony is this: while the date marked authenticity in commemoration, the film's content did not. So, there's a dissonance. Paying homage through timing, yet playing loose with facts in the frame. It's one of those hidden threads that tells us a lot about how Hollywood treats history. Location battles disguise the absence of snow and forests. Closely tied to the Spain shooting revelation, the film lacks many of the snowy forest visuals that define the real Ardennes offensive. Reviewers flagged that the shooting terrain bear no resemblance to what the men fought in. The Ardennes in December was bitter cold, deep snow, limited visibility. The film's terrain often looks clearer, drier, more open. Why hide that? Practicality. Snow is hard to guarantee, terrain is costly, and the logistics of large tank shooting demand space and accessibility. So the production went for the look of war over the feel of war. For those watching today, it's a clue. Some of the film's epic battle moments are actually set in Spain in warmer conditions. The magic of cinema works until you know how the trick was done. A legal war behind the war. Studios fought over titles and rights. Here's a real juicy secret. At the time production was underway, another studio, Columbia Pictures, had plans for its own Battle of the Bulge film, casting names like Van Heflin, John Wayne, David Niven, and Laurence Olivier. As part of a settlement, Warner Brothers agreed that their film would not mention major real-life figures such as Eisenhower, Montgomery, Bradley, Patton, Anthony McAuliffe, and others. That decision explains why the film uses fictional colonels rather than the celebrated generals of the actual battle. So behind the scenes of the million-dollar tanks and snow-free hills, there was corporate maneuvering, a studio war. That means the film's historical omissions aren't purely artistic, they're contractual. When you watch the film and wonder, where's Jenner Patton? This is why. The script was constrained. The film later influenced sci-fi battles. Yes, really. One fact that surprised many: Battle of the Bulge reportedly influenced the look and feel of the silhouette battles in The Empire Strikes Back, 1980. When you see the Hoth terrain, the sweeping icy plains and tank-like walkers, you're partly seeing echoes of giant war movie thinking. The technique of staging huge formations, low-angle lenses, panoramic widescreen, those visual tools were honed in 1960s epics like this. Thus, the film's legacy reaches beyond history, beyond war films, even into the galaxy far, far away. It tells us that Hollywood's epic war moments don't just vanish after their run, they morph into new genres and new settings. This one's secret: a 1965 battle film shaped a 1980 space opera. Some of the worst criticisms came from veterans and historians. What many viewers didn't know when the film hit theaters: several veterans and military historians were unimpressed by its historical fidelity. The lack of snow, the misportrayal of command, the simplified narratives, they all added up to what some considered a missed opportunity to honor the real troops. The terrain looked wrong. The tactics were compressed. The timeline rearranged. The film later influenced sci-fi battles. Yes, really. What if a World War II tank assault inspired the icy battlefields of a galaxy far, far away? Believe it or not, Battle of the Bulge left a mark on The Empire Strikes Back, 1980. George Lucas and his visual team studied widescreen war epics to choreograph the legendary Hoth sequence, the AT-AT walkers, the snow-covered expanse, the desperate rebel defense. The influence came from Battle of the Bulge's sweeping camera work and mass formation staging. Cinematographer Jack Hildyard's panoramic ultra-panavision visuals demonstrated how to move tanks like chess pieces across a landscape while maintaining geography and scale, something Star Wars would later translate into intergalactic warfare. It's poetic. A film once criticized for inauthentic snow ended up shaping cinema's most famous snow battle 15 years later. The DNA is all there: slow, heavy machines advancing through blinding light, and small defenders fighting back against impossible odds. Lucas's editors even used Battle of the Bulge clips as temporary footage while assembling the Hoth battle storyboards. In a strange twist of cinematic fate, a war film once faulted for historical inaccuracy found immortality not in military history, but in science fiction mythology. Its grand spectacle outlived its critics, echoing forever in the sound of approaching metal feet on ice. Some of the worst criticisms came from veterans and historians. When Battle of the Bulge hit theaters, many moviegoers were thrilled by its tanks and explosions, but veterans who'd actually fought in the Ardennes saw something else: a distortion. Letters poured into newspapers and studios from soldiers angered by the film's geography, its fictional commanders, and the absence of snow that had defined their suffering. Some said the movie turned one of America's darkest winter battles into a desert western with tanks. Even historian Stephen Ambrose later cited the film as a textbook example of Hollywood rewriting history for spectacle. To many veterans, the Ardennes wasn't entertainment. It was a frozen nightmare that took over 19,000 Allied lives. Seeing that horror turned into sun-baked Spanish hills felt like betrayal. Yet the film's defenders argued that Hollywood had always dramatized history, and that its purpose was inspiration, not instruction. This clash between accuracy and artistry remains one of the film's most fascinating legacies. It proved that war cinema must always answer two questions: who is it for the historian or the audience? And can a based-on-true-events story ever satisfy both? Battle of the Bulge may not have honored every fact, but it certainly reignited a national debate on how we remember the past. One star almost didn't get to play his scene, but ended up making the cut anyway. Charles Bronson's rugged face became one of the film's visual anchors, but his participation was almost jeopardized. Reports from the Spanish set suggest that Bronson arrived late due to scheduling overlaps with another production, and his initial shooting days were chaotic. Director Ken Anakin was dealing with massive logistical challenges, hundreds of extras, armored vehicles, pyrotechnics, and time constraints, and was rumored to have considered scaling down Bronson's role to keep the schedule intact. Yet, when Bronson stepped in as Major Walensky, his natural grit fit the film's texture perfectly. He filmed several of his close-ups and dialogue scenes in extreme heat while wearing heavy winter gear, a bizarre irony given that they were depicting freezing Ardennes conditions. The sweat you see on Bronson's brow in some moments isn't just acting. It's real exhaustion under Spanish sun. Anakin reportedly remarked that Bronson brought truth through attitude, giving the ensemble much-needed edge. Even if his screen time was limited, his performance resonated a stoic soldier caught in the chaos. In a film packed with spectacle, Bronson's minimalism became its emotional punctuation mark. Sometimes, the hardest-won scenes leave the strongest impressions, and his survival in the final cut became one of its quiet triumphs. The runtime hides cuts the version you watched may not be the one shot. At a staggering 170 minutes, Battle of the Bulge tested audiences' endurance. Yet few realize that even this epic runtime masked dozens of trims. Early drafts reportedly exceeded 190 minutes, including entire character arcs that never reached theaters. Warner Brothers executives demanded tighter pacing for international distribution, forcing editor Derek Partridge to remove secondary storylines and transitional scenes. Then came the home video era. To fit a single VHS cassette, studios used pan and scan cropping, chopping away nearly half of the film's majestic widescreen compositions. Tank battles lost their symmetry, aerial shots became claustrophobic, and conversations felt unnaturally close. Later, when DVD and Blu-ray releases restored the Ultra Panavision 70 aspect ratio, audiences rediscovered the film's original grandeur, and suddenly it looked like a completely different movie. Some historians even argue that the cropped versions contributed to its lukewarm reputation. The editing distortions made its pacing clunky, and its geography confusing. So, when people say Battle of the Bulge looked fake or flat, they might not realize they weren't watching the real version at all. In today's restored 4K transfers, those flaws vanish, and what remains is a genuine technical marvel of the 1960s. The lesson: never underestimate how much a single cut or crop can rewrite cinematic history. The film's legacy is more curious than celebrated. Decades later, Battle of the Bulge occupies a strange place in cinema history, both monumental and misunderstood. It wasn't the box office disaster some recall. In fact, it ranked among Britain's top earners in 1966 and drew solid international revenue. Yet it failed to capture the critical acclaim of The Longest Day or Patton. Its mix of sweeping spectacle and simplified storytelling left it stranded between historical chronicle and Saturday matinee entertainment. But with time, critics began to reassess it, not as a war film, but as a mirror of its era, a 1960s Hollywood struggling to reconcile patriotism with cinematic showmanship. Modern viewers see it differently, a gorgeous, widescreen relic, flawed but fascinating. Film schools now reference it in discussions on narrative compression, color cinematography, and lens composition. Its production choices, filming in Spain, compressing timelines, blending truth with myth, are case studies in Hollywood's obsession with grandeur. Most remarkably, the film continues to inspire wargame designers, reenactors, and restoration artists who want to understand how cinema shapes memory. Battle of the Bulge didn't win the battle for authenticity, but it won something subtler: endurance. Like the soldiers it portrays, it marches on, battered but unforgotten, teaching each new generation that the fog of war extends even to the silver screen. And there we are. What started with a single question, how did this big war film become more myth than memory, ends with another. If Battle of the Bulge shaped what war films look like and what they leave out, what does that say about all the war films we've loved? If you dug these revelations, drop a comment below with your favorite fact. Share this with your film buff friends. Hit subscribe and ring the bell for more movie secrets, because next time we'll uncover a film that changed how we view villains. Until then, keep watching, keep questioning, keep discovering.